Get ready for the most electrifying moment in our tale, when a seemingly ordinary father reveals his elite Delta Force training against a group of reckless bikers who dare to bully his daughter. From tension-filled standoffs to an epic battle of wits and weapons, this story has it all. You won't want to miss how this quiet farmer uses cunning, courage, and skill to protect everything he holds dear. Curious about how it ends? Stick around and experience every twist and turn that leads to a final showdown guaranteed to leave you breathless. And if you enjoy this kind of gripping storytelling, please subscribe to my channel, Farmer's Story, to stay updated on more heart-pounding adventures and uplifting tales. Your support means the world, and it helps us bring you even more exciting content. The Parker farm sat several miles outside the nearest town, surrounded by gentle, rolling fields of corn and wheat. At first glance, it was the picture of rural simplicity: a modest two-story farmhouse with a sloping roof, a big red barn just off the gravel driveway, and a battered tractor humming away in the distance. Folks passing by might never guess that this quiet patch of land concealed a past more extraordinary than the average countryside homestead. The farm's lone occupants were Robert Parker and his 18-year-old daughter, Emily. A widower, Robert had raised Emily alone since she was a toddler. He worked from dawn till dusk, tending to the crops and livestock, teaching Emily the values of discipline and kindness. Their days usually ended with a hearty family dinner, often followed by Emily reading on the porch while her father sipped coffee and admired the sunset. Despite Robert's reserved nature, the two shared a close bond forged by adversity and unconditional love. Yet Robert was not always the simple farmer he appeared to be. Unbeknownst to most of the townspeople, he had once served in one of the U.S. Army's most elite units, Delta Force. During his service, he had traveled the globe, facing dangers that he never spoke of to friends or neighbors. Even Emily knew only fragments, fleeting remarks about specialized training and oblique references to missions in faraway places. What she did grasp was that her father had chosen this pastoral life for a reason. After too many years of combat, he wanted nothing more than a peaceful home where he could raise his daughter free from the world's darker shadows. Their township, Stonebridge, was home to fewer than 3,000 residents. A typical day saw farmers at the feed store discussing equipment, mothers gathering at the one-room library, and a handful of teenagers hanging out at the local diner after school. Crime was virtually unheard of, aside from the occasional petty theft or a kid caught speeding. Everyone knew everyone else's name, and they looked out for one another. It was precisely the sort of place Robert believed would keep Emily safe. Still, troubles had a way of drifting along empty highways, slipping into even the quietest corners of the country. Recently, the local radio station had mentioned a biker gang roaming near the outskirts of the state. Some believed they were simply rowdy drifters looking for cheap thrills. Others insisted they were seasoned criminals, rumored to run drugs and extort small businesses. Most of Stonebridge's residents were too busy or too trusting to pay much heed to rumors, preferring to assume the gang would move on. Robert, however, had learned never to ignore the faintest whisper of danger. While outwardly calm, he discreetly stayed informed by reading regional crime reports and having hushed conversations with the local sheriff whenever he stopped by town for supplies. He prayed this biker gang, if real, would steer clear of his family's farm. But deep down, the ex-soldier in him knew trouble might come knocking, no matter how secluded or seemingly ordinary their home might appear. On a brisk Monday morning, Emily woke early to feed the chickens and collect fresh eggs. She relished this part of the day, finding the quiet dawn comforting. Robert was already out in the barn repairing a faulty water pump. As Emily approached, she couldn't help but notice how effortlessly he swung the heavy tools. For a man in his early 50s, he was impressively fit and moved with a smooth efficiency that suggested more than a lifetime of farm labor. "Morning, sweetheart," he greeted, wiping sweat from his brow. "How about we finish these chores and head into town? We need to stock up on feed and fertilizer." Emily agreed. She was due at the diner for a short shift that afternoon. Before heading out, the two completed their routine tasks, checking fences, ensuring the cattle had fresh water, and scanning for any signs of crop pests. This meticulous routine was a reflection of Robert's disciplined mindset, although he always framed it as good farming practice for Emily's sake. Around mid-morning, they loaded supplies into the old pickup truck and began the 7-mile drive into Stonebridge. The roads were mostly deserted, rolling hills and fields of tall grass stretched in every direction, with a solitary windmill marking the final turn before town. They didn't pass a single vehicle until they reached the first row of clapboard houses on the outskirts. Stonebridge itself was humming with weekday activity. Trucks parked outside the hardware store, and school buses rattled down side streets, dropping off children who had half-day lessons. The local cafe exuded the warm smell of pastries, and a few senior citizens chatted at picnic tables outside the old post office. It was a slice of the American heartland, cozy, predictable, and safe. Robert parked in front of McAllen's Feed and Supply, leaving Emily to wander next door to pick up some groceries. Along the way, she stopped by the bulletin board outside the library and noticed a notice pinned up. Warning, biker activity in adjacent counties. Exercise caution. It was the first time she'd seen an official mention in Stonebridge. She frowned, remembering bits of conversation she'd overheard about a rowdy biker gang. It was unsettling to see it confirmed in writing. After gathering produce from the small grocery, Emily rejoined her father. "Dad, did you see the notice about bikers?" she asked, handing him a paper bag filled with apples and flour. He gave a subtle nod. "I've heard the sheriff mention them. We'll keep our eyes open, but they'll probably stick to bigger towns. Easier to find what they want there." Despite his seemingly casual tone, Robert's gaze lingered on the edges of Main Street. Emily recognized that focused look. He was taking in details, checking to see if anyone seemed out of place. Their errands went smoothly, and soon they headed back toward the farm with a loaded truck bed. Neither of them suspected that this calm day would set the stage for events that would shatter their illusion of rural security. That same afternoon, the wind carried the distant rumble of motorcycles across the farmland. Emily was kneeling in the garden, weeding a patch of tomatoes when she heard the noise. Initially, she paid it little mind. Motorcycles weren't entirely uncommon, sometimes passing bikers toured the scenic back roads. But the rumble intensified, growing louder until it seemed to resonate with an undercurrent of agitation. A few minutes later, Robert emerged from the barn, his expression guarded. "You hear that?" he asked, scanning the horizon. Emily nodded, standing up to dust off her knees. The engines roared, then quieted. Nothing else came of it, so they both returned to their tasks, assuming the riders had simply passed by. The next day, Emily planned to work a shift at the diner. After her father dropped her off, she greeted the usual lunch crowd, truckers who ordered burgers, local farmers sipping coffee, and a couple of mothers with young kids sharing milkshakes. Everything felt routine until, near the end of her shift, a small group of men in worn leather jackets strolled in. They carried their helmets, and the pungent aroma of gasoline clung to them. Their presence caused an uneasy hush. Emily was clearing a table when one of them whistled. He was a burly man with a scraggly beard. "Hey, sweetheart," he called, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Why don't you come take our order?" His grin radiated both confidence and a slight edge. Emily approached with professional politeness, albeit on guard. The men ordered beers and sandwiches, conversing among themselves about the next score and referencing towns they had visited. Emily tried to keep her distance, but it was impossible not to notice their invasive stares. After serving them, she retreated behind the counter, feeling ill at ease. The cafe owner, an older woman named Tess, gave Emily a reassuring nod, though Tess herself looked unsettled. Half an hour later, as Emily busied herself cleaning cups, one of the bikers shouted across the diner, "This place is too quiet. Don't you folks know how to have fun?" A couple of customers looked down, not wanting trouble. The men finished their drinks, threw some crumpled bills on the table, and left, slamming the door behind them. Tess shook her head and quickly went to lock the door. "They came in with a chip on their shoulder," Tess muttered, her voice subdued. "We don't see that often around here. You stay safe, Emily. If they give you any trouble in the future, you let me know." Emily collected herself and finished her shift with lingering anxiety. Were these the bikers mentioned in the warnings? If so, they definitely didn't exude the carefree attitude of hobbyist riders. Something about their demeanor set her nerves on edge, an undercurrent of aggression that seemed just a hair trigger away from exploding. When her father arrived to pick her up, she informed him about the men. Robert's jaw tightened slightly. "They'll probably move on soon," he said, but his tone wasn't entirely convincing. Though he didn't show it often, Emily could see her father's protective instincts flaring. The next day or two would reveal whether these newcomers truly posed a threat or if they were just restless travelers passing through. 2 days later, Emily needed to run a few errands after finishing her diner shift. She hopped into her old sedan and drove to the local grocery store. Located on the main street beside a small bookstore, the store was typically a refuge of familiarity. That evening, however, as she pulled into the lot, she spotted several large motorcycles parked haphazardly near the entrance. Immediately, her stomach twisted with apprehension. Inside, she found the same bearded man from the diner, along with 3 other bikers. They were loitering in the snack aisle, talking loudly and sipping from cans of cheap beer, likely shoplifted. Emily tried to remain inconspicuous, quietly gathering the few items she needed: flour, sugar, and eggs. But fate had other plans. As she approached the cashier, her path intersected with the group's. The bearded man recognized her instantly. "Hey, it's the cute waitress," he crowed, raising his beer can in a mock toast. "You following us or what?" The others snickered, stepping forward to flank him. Emily tensed. "I'm just shopping," she replied, voice taut. "I'd appreciate it if you'd let me through." He smirked, taking a swig of beer. "You sure got a mouth on you. But you see, we're kind of in the mood to talk. Maybe you can entertain us?" His buddies chortled, eyeing her in a way that made her skin crawl. She glanced around, noting that the store clerk looked terrified, and a couple of customers had backed away. Emily tried to stay calm. "I'm not here to talk. I just want to pay for my things and leave." One of the bikers sidled closer, forcing her to step back. "That's too bad, because we could have some real fun." With that, he tapped the brim of her baseball cap, as though asserting dominance. Emily felt her face flush with anger and fear. Before she could muster a response, another biker let out a harsh laugh. "Oh, don't be like that. We ain't that scary, unless you give us reason to be." A tense silence followed. Emily's heart pounded. She thought about calling the police, but in her rural town, response times could be slow, and the store's landline was behind the register, too far away without provoking the men. She considered dropping her groceries and making a dash for the exit, but she was cornered. Suddenly, the store's manager, a short man in his 50s, emerged from the back office, summoning what little courage he could. "Hey, you're not allowed to drink in here, and you sure as heck can't harass customers. Get out before I call the comm." The bearded biker's eyes flickered with irritation. For a moment, it seemed he might lash out. Then a sick grin spread across his face. "Fine, we'll go. But you," he pointed a finger at Emily, "we'll be seeing you around." They shuffled out, knocking over a display of cereal boxes on their way. Emily's shoulders sagged with relief, but she knew this was only a temporary reprieve. Their parting words sent a chill down her spine. This time they had singled her out by face and name, and they knew Stonebridge's roads well enough to find her if they wished. When Emily got home, she found Robert repairing a tractor part in the barn. The moment he saw her, he knew something was off. Her hands were still trembling, and her eyes shone with anxiety. Without hesitation, he switched off the small workshop light and led her into the kitchen, offering a glass of water. "Tell me everything," he said calmly. Emily recounted the grocery store incident, how the bikers cornered her, the threat they made as they left. Robert listened in silence, though his jaw clenched intermittently. When she finished, he nodded grimly. "I was afraid of this," he murmured, rubbing a calloused hand over his forehead. "They've gotten bolder. Stonebridge isn't accustomed to dealing with people like that." Emily swallowed. "Dad, I'm scared. What if they come here? They already implied they know where to find me." He set the glass down gently. "First off, you're safe here. Second, I'll make sure we're prepared. These men don't realize what kind of training I have, but we'll hope it doesn't come to violence." She took a deep breath. "So, now what?" Robert led her to a locked cabinet in a discreet corner of the living room. With careful deliberation, he opened it, revealing an array of firearms neatly laid out. A hunting rifle, a shotgun, a couple of pistols, and extra ammunition. Each weapon was meticulously maintained, the metal gleaming under the overhead light. Emily's eyes widened. "Dad, I knew you had some guns, but—" He nodded. "I never planned on using them for anything but protecting the property. But it's better to have them and not need them than to need them and not have them." His voice held a steely note she seldom heard in her father's usually gentle tone. He proceeded to check each firearm, ensuring they were in working order. Emily watched, uneasy, but also strangely relieved. She knew her father's background was more than simple soldiering. She recalled how swiftly he had subdued a stray dog that once attacked a neighbor's kid, and the terrifying competence she glimpsed in his eyes during that brief altercation. Here, for the first time in a while, was that same intensity. Over dinner, they discussed practical steps, reinforcing the farmhouse doors, ensuring motion sensor lights were functional, and keeping a phone by each window in case they needed to call for help. They planned for Emily to avoid late-night errands alone and to keep the farm gate locked at all times. Yet a question gnawed at Emily. Would any of that deter a group of determined bikers? Her father's presence gave her confidence, but she couldn't banish a growing sense of dread. In a larger city, the police might clamp down quickly. Out here, help could be miles and many minutes away. Robert squeezed her hand gently as they cleared the dinner plates. "We'll be all right," he said. "Trust me, and trust yourself." There was conviction in his eyes, an unwavering steadiness that hinted at his hidden past. Emily tried to cling to that reassurance, hoping that his formidable background would remain a secret no longer needed, rather than a skill set soon to be tested by those menaces on motorcycles. As days passed without further direct encounters, Emily found herself oscillating between relief and uneasy anticipation. She stuck to Robert's guidance. No solo errands after dusk, lock the house by nightfall, and text him whenever she left the diner. Despite these precautions, she couldn't shake the image of the bearded biker promising, "We'll be seeing you around." One afternoon, Mark Burrows, a longtime farmhand who occasionally worked part-time for Robert, stopped by. A burly man in his late 20s, Mark had known the Parker family for years. When he heard rumors about a biker gang hassling people in town, he came to check in. "You need any extra hands around here, Mr. Parker?" he asked, glancing around as though expecting trouble to appear at any moment. "I heard some nasty talk at the feed store. Word is this gang might be more than just drunks. People say they've got ties to heavier crime." Robert, who was loading hay bales into a shed, appreciated Mark's concern. "Could always use help," he replied evenly. "But you don't need to risk yourself on my account." Mark shrugged. "I know how to handle a rifle, and your daughter's like a sister to me. If there's trouble, I'd rather be here to help you protect what's yours." Reluctantly, Robert agreed. He suspected Mark's presence could be a deterrent if the bikers did decide to make an appearance. With that settled, the three of them spent the afternoon strengthening the farm's perimeter. They added some heavy wooden beams to the main gate, installed fresh barbed wire along sections of fence that had sagged over the years, and tested the floodlights set up around the barn. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Emily brought out sandwiches and iced tea for dinner on the porch. Despite the underlying tension, the scene momentarily felt normal. Cicadas chirping, a gentle breeze rustling the crops, and the sky awash in pinks and oranges. The conversation drifted to Mark's childhood memories, Emily's plans for the future, and Robert's improvements to the old tractor. For a brief, precious moment, they almost forgot the shadow looming over them. That peaceful lull ended just after twilight. Emily was in her room reading when her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number displayed a single chilling message. "Soon." Her heart skipped a beat. She rushed to show her father and Mark. They studied it, expressions grim. "Did you give your number to anyone suspicious?" Mark asked, though he suspected the answer. Emily shook her head. It had to be the bikers. The fact they had her number suggested a level of resourcefulness, or perhaps intimidation that forced someone else to give it to them. Robert clenched his jaw. "They're playing games," he said quietly, flipping the phone over, "trying to scare us before they make a move." The three exchanged uneasy glances. If the bikers were capable of extracting Emily's phone number, it hinted they were more organized or connected than just a random pack of rowdy outlaws. The sense of time ticking down toward an inevitable confrontation grew heavier with each passing hour. Around midnight, Mark was dozing on the living room couch, while Robert sat at the kitchen table, rifle disassembled before him. He was methodically cleaning and oiling each component, a ritual equal parts maintenance and mental preparation. Emily, unable to sleep, hovered nearby, sipping tea as she tried to steady her nerves. Her father glanced up from his work. "You should try to get some rest," he said gently, though his own posture suggested vigilance. Emily shook her head. I can't sleep. I keep imagining headlights rolling up the driveway. Robert carefully snapped the rifle back together. I get it, but we can't let them rob us of our sanity. Sooner or later, they'll come if they're serious. Until then, living in constant fear only gives them power. Remember that. Emily nodded, sensing the truth in his words, but still feeling the weight of worry pressing in on her. She walked to the window and peeked outside. A single floodlight illuminated the yard and part of the gravel drive, revealing the lonely silhouette of the barn. Beyond that was darkness, an expanse of farmland blending seamlessly with the night. They could see anyone approaching, but she dreaded the possibility of multiple bikes rumbling in at once. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her. She retreated to her bedroom, leaving Robert to finish his checks. Sleep came in fitful bursts, her dreams peppered with images of roaring engines and menacing silhouettes. When she awoke at dawn, she found her father still awake, sipping black coffee and gazing out the window. The next day, Emily decided to keep her diner shift, partly out of stubborn resolve to live normally, partly to quell cabin fever. She drove into town with Mark following in his truck for added security. During her shift, she overheard more gossip about the bikers. Some said they'd camped at an abandoned rest stop, while others claimed to have seen them prowling around an industrial park on the far edge of the county. Fortunately, they didn't appear at the diner that day. Returning to the farm, Emily felt a small spark of hope that maybe the gang had drifted elsewhere. That spark was extinguished when, just before sunset, a pickup truck rattled up the driveway. Out stepped the local sheriff and his deputy, their expressions grim. "Robert, Emily," the sheriff said, tipping his hat, "we got word that some of those bikers were sniffing around for folks who live outside town. They may have gotten your address from a bar owner who was strong-armed." Robert exhaled slowly. "Do you have a plan to deal with them?" The sheriff's mustache twitched with frustration. "We're a small department, so we can't mount 24-hour patrols out here. But we'll respond as fast as we can if trouble arises. I'm advising you to keep your doors locked and maybe consider staying with family in a more populated area if you're feeling unsafe." Emily looked to her father, unsure how he'd respond. He simply shook his head. "This is our home. We'll manage. But thank you for letting us know." The sheriff studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right, just be careful. They might not be the type to give you a second chance." A somber mood settled over the farm that evening. The sheriff's warning confirmed the bikers had explicitly targeted them, and it struck home how isolated they truly were. Robert, Emily, and Mark gathered around the kitchen table, mapping out possible scenarios on a notepad. Robert's manner was methodical, almost military-like, as he discussed vantage points, fallback positions, and how to minimize risk. Mark cast a worried glance at the windows. "I know you've got training, Mr. Parker, but these guys might be more than we can handle alone. We should call more people, maybe gather some neighbors or friends who can help stand guard." Robert set his pencil down. "I don't want to put others in harm's way if we can avoid it. They're coming after Emily and me specifically. If we drag our neighbors in, someone could get hurt." Emily understood his reasoning, though she also feared the notion of going toe-to-toe with a large group of violent bikers. She turned to her father. "So, what's the plan if they show up? You're only one person, even if you have special skills." "First, we rely on deterrence, good lighting, a locked gate, visible signs that we're armed. That alone might scare off those who are just looking for easy targets," Robert said. "If they push past that, we fall back inside and defend from a position of cover. This house is old, but it has thick walls, and we know the layout better than they do." Mark nodded, tapping the table. "We could also park vehicles to block the driveway, maybe slow them down. That'd keep them from rolling right up to the porch." Robert considered this. "Good idea. Let's do that tomorrow. I'll also see if we have any lumber left to reinforce windows." He paused, gaze flicking to Emily. "But let's be clear. Our main goal is to avoid a shootout. We'll do everything to warn them off before it comes to that." Later that night, as the moon rose overhead, Emily found herself in the barn, feeding the horses for the last time before bed. The structure smelled of hay and dusty sunlight, comforting scents she associated with her earliest memories. She paused, listening to the quiet. In her mind, the barn had always felt like a sanctuary, but she couldn't stop imagining the thunder of motorcycle engines rolling up the gravel path. Returning inside, she noticed Robert sitting by a window in the living room, gun prop beside him. He was watching the dark shapes of trees swaying in the wind. When she approached, he gave her a reassuring half smile. "Go on to sleep, Em. I'll be here." She nodded. Part of her wanted to stay awake and help, but fatigue weighed heavily. As she climbed the stairs to her room, she whispered a silent prayer that the bikers would realize their mistake and ride away. Despite her father's calm confidence and Mark's loyal support, the possibility of violence loomed like a thundercloud on the horizon. Morning broke with a hazy golden light settling on the Parker farm. Emily and Mark busied themselves outside, moving Robert's pickup and Mark's old truck into the driveway in a staggered position to block direct access to the porch. They also stacked unused lumber and hay bales near critical points, creating impromptu cover in case of a confrontation. Inside, Robert arranged furniture to clear lines of sight from windows and ensure safe firing lanes, though Emily hoped it would never come to that. The tension felt surreal, like preparing for a storm that might or might not hit. By early afternoon, with the sun high and the chores mostly done, Emily made sandwiches while Robert and Mark double-checked the barn. They were halfway through their lunch break when a distant roar caught their ears. At first, it was just a low rumble, indistinguishable from a tractor. Then it grew louder, the unmistakable growl of multiple motorcycle engines. Mark shot Robert a look. This might be it. Emily felt her stomach twist. She and Mark hurried into the house while Robert locked the front gate. He didn't bother to hide his rifle this time. If the bikers saw it, perhaps they'd realize this farm was no easy target. From the porch, Emily peered through a narrow gap between stacked crates and the living room window, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Within minutes, the bikers emerged into view, a gang of at least 7 or 8. The lead rider was the bearded man, his hair blowing behind him as he cut the engine. The rest lined up alongside, forming an imposing row of machines that idled menacingly, their riders glaring at the farmhouse. "Yo, farmer!" the bearded biker hollered, spotting Robert with the rifle in his hands. "That's a nice piece you got. You plan on using it?" He spat as if to show contempt. Robert stood behind the farm gate, his stance calm but unyielding. "I don't want any trouble," he said, voice carrying over the steady thrum of engines. "But this is private property. You're trespassing." The biker let out a gravelly laugh. "You sure about that, old man? 'Cause we heard you and your little girl like to mouth off. We came to settle the score." A few of the others revved their engines, a challenge in their postures. Emily clutched the windowsill, heart pounding. Peeking through, she could see one of the men scanning the driveway, likely calculating ways to push through the makeshift barricade. Another sat on his bike with a chain coiled around his wrist. A chill ran down her spine at the sight. These men hadn't come for a friendly chat. Robert took a breath. "Settle what score? You harassed my daughter. You threatened us. That's on you." He leveled his rifle slightly, making his position unmistakable. "Leave now, and nobody gets hurt." The bearded man's grin twisted into a sneer. He turned to his crew. "All right, boys, looks like we've got ourselves a tough guy." Then, as if on cue, they dismounted and began to fan out, forming a loose semicircle around the main gate. A drumbeat of impending violence filled the air. The tension thickened as the bikers positioned themselves. Robert, holding his rifle steady, issued a final warning. "Don't do this. You won't like how it ends." From her vantage point in the living room, Emily watched her father project a calm authority. She knew from bits of his military past that he was capable of handling extreme pressure, but seeing him on the front line like this sent her heart racing. Mark knelt beside her, a hunting rifle cradled in his arms. "Should I cover him?" Mark whispered. Emily nodded, her voice caught in her throat. They both aimed through a slight opening in the window, ready to back Robert up if the bikers rushed the gate. Outside, the bearded man scoffed. "Big talk, old man, but you're outnumbered." He made a slicing gesture through the air. "Move that junk out of our way, or we'll do it for you. Either way, we're taking a piece of your hide today." Robert's voice remained surprisingly measured. "You don't understand who you're dealing with." One of the younger bikers snorted. "We deal with old farm Hickson all the time. Ain't that right, boss?" The bearded man laughed, but it was a tense, humorless sound. "That's right. Last chance. Step aside, or we ride in. Robert said nothing, simply adjusting his stance, a subtle shift that set off alarm bells in Emily's head. She recognized it as her father sliding into a combative posture. The air crackled with a beat of silence. Then a sudden motion as the bearded man swung a hand downward, signaling two of his henchmen to charge forward, crowbars and chains in hand. Robert fired a single warning shot into the ground. The crack of the rifle made the bikers flinch, but they didn't stop. Adrenaline and bravado carried them. One swung a crowbar at the wooden beam, blocking the gate, aiming to bash it aside. Another prepared to fling the chain over the fence, hoping to yank it down. Mark squeezed his trigger from the window, sending a bullet into the dirt near the chain-wielding man's boots. The man cursed, stumbling backward. Robert pivoted, chambered another round, and aimed high near the crowbar biker's shoulder, firing close enough to tear the sleeve of the man's jacket. The crowbar clanged to the ground as the biker yelped, clutching a bleeding graze. The other bikers hesitated. They hadn't expected such precise, deliberate shots. This wasn't a panicked homeowner randomly firing. It was a calculated defense. Even the bearded leader's bravado dimmed slightly, though he glared defiantly at Robert. "You're gonna pay for that!" he roared, drawing a handgun from inside his jacket. He unleashed several shots in Robert's direction. Sparks flew as bullets ricocheted off metal fence posts. Robert dropped to a crouch and quickly returned fire, hitting the ground in front of the bearded biker's feet, forcing him to jump back. At the living room window, Emily felt her body tense at each deafening shot. This was not some playful warning anymore. Lead was flying both ways. The entire farm seemed alive with echoes of gunfire. Through the acrid smell of gunpowder, she realized that the men outside had finally grasped the truth. The kindly old farmer they'd intended to bully was something far more dangerous, and they were now caught in a fight they could easily lose. For a few seconds, chaos reigned. The bikers scrambled for cover behind their motorcycles and any scrap of debris they could find. Mark and Robert both paused, holding their fire to see if the gang would retreat. Breathing hard, Emily ducked further inside. Every instinct told her to hide, but she also knew her father and Mark needed an extra set of eyes. She crept toward another window, scanning the yard's blind spots. Adrenaline sharpened her senses. She was acutely aware of each muffled curse from the bikers, each flicker of motion among the shadows. "Now what, boss?" one of the bikers hissed. "They're shooting to hit, not just scare us." The bearded man gritted his teeth. "We came here for a reason, and we're not leaving empty-handed." His bravado wavered for a heartbeat, but anger and pride pushed him forward. He motioned for two more of his gang to circle around to the barn side of the property, presumably seeking a flank or a less defended entry. Mark caught a glimpse of the movement and alerted Robert. "They're trying to flank us," he yelled, firing a shot toward the barn area to keep the bikers from advancing. The bullet splintered a wooden post, causing the men to dive for cover. Meanwhile, Robert ducked behind a sturdy section of fence. His mind raced with tactical calculations. These bikers were untrained, but they had numbers. He needed to end this quickly, or risk being overrun. He sprang up to fire another round, aiming just past one man's shoulder. The bullet whizzed by, ruffling the biker's jacket. The man yelped and collapsed to the ground, cursing as he realized how close he'd come to being shot in the chest. Another of the group took a few panicked shots in Robert's direction, but the bullets went wide. In the house, Emily watched the chain wielder and one of his buddies duck behind a tractor in the yard. They appeared to be exchanging frantic whispers. She heard fragments. "This is nuts. We got to get out of here." Their fear, however, was counterbalanced by the bearded man's rage. He refused to back down, yelling at them to keep pushing forward. Sensing the momentum was with the defenders, Robert shouted a final warning. "My friend, you should leave now or the next shots won't be warnings. I've done my best not to kill anyone, but you've exhausted my patience." The bikers hesitated, glancing at one another as realization dawned. This farmer was ex-military, maybe even special forces. The precision of his shots and the unwavering steadiness of his voice underscored that fact. They had no plan for dealing with someone who systematically outmaneuvered them. One man scrambled onto his bike, muttering curses under his breath. Another quickly followed. The bearded leader stood his ground a moment longer, fury evident in his glare. He fired 2 more shots wildly at the fence, bullets ricocheting harmlessly. Then, acknowledging defeat, he gestured for the remaining men to mount up. Engines roared to life. Tires kicked up gravel. In less than a minute, the farmyard was empty except for the lingering echoes of angry threats. Robert stood by the fence, rifle still raised, watching them disappear down the road with a grim expression. Emily released a trembling breath. The standoff was over. For now. In the aftermath, silence blanketed the Parker farm, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the distant lowing of cattle. Emily emerged from the house, her legs still shaky from the adrenaline crash. Mark followed, rifle in hand. Robert lowered his weapon but kept it by his side, scanning the perimeter for any stragglers. Emily's gaze swept over the property, scattered bullet casings glinting in the sun, splintered fence posts, and a few spots of blood on the ground where a biker had been grazed. She swallowed hard, trying to reconcile the scene of violence with the idyllic farmland she'd known all her life. "You okay, Dad?" she asked softly, stepping toward him. He offered a tense nod. "I'm fine." His voice carried a hint of regret. "I didn't want it to come to this." Mark exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "They pushed too far. They thought you were just some easy target." Robert nodded, glancing from Mark to Emily. "Let's call the sheriff. We'll need to report what happened." As Mark fetched his phone, Emily studied her father's expression. There was no gloating, no anger, only a somber acceptance. She recalled how he had deliberately aimed his shots to wound or intimidate rather than kill. This was the code he lived by. Do only what's necessary, no more. Even in defending his home, he seemed weighed down by the memories of a past he'd tried to leave behind. Within half an hour, the sheriff arrived, siren blaring, accompanied by 2 deputies. Neighbors slowly trickled onto the property as well, curious about the sudden commotion. Questions flew rapidly. People wanted to know how many bikers there were, what weapons they had, and whether anyone on the farm was hurt. Emily tried her best to recount the events. "They came up, threatened my dad, and started trying to break in. He warned them, fired some warning shots. They fired back." Her voice wavered slightly, the reality still sinking in. The sheriff surveyed the scattered shell casings, letting out a troubled sigh. "Looks like things got real intense. You did well to defend yourselves, Robert, but I'm worried those men might return with reinforcements." Robert crossed his arms. "If they do, we'll be ready, but I'm hoping they realize they made a mistake and move on." The sheriff nodded but couldn't hide his concern. "I'll circulate their descriptions to neighboring departments. We'll increase patrols along the county roads for a while, but I can't promise we'll catch them." As the deputies began to collect evidence and speak to witnesses, Emily felt exhaustion wash over her. The day had turned surreal, a firefight where her father's sharpshooting likely saved lives, including those of the bikers, ironically. Residents stared at her father in a new light, perhaps guessing that behind the quiet demeanor lay a warrior's skill set. When the crowd thinned and the sheriff drove off, the farm was left in a reflective hush. Robert placed a reassuring hand on Emily's shoulder. "Let's clean this up and try to get some rest. I know it's hard, but we have to keep going." Over the following days, rumors of the encounter spread through Stonebridge and beyond. People whispered about how a group of tough bikers had been run off by Farmer Parker, who, according to some, had the steady aim of a sniper. Exaggerated tales painted him as a near-mythic figure. Some claimed he'd single-handedly outshot an entire gang without taking cover. Others embellished details into outlandish legends. Emily wasn't sure how to handle the gossip. On one hand, she felt a surge of pride in her father's ability to protect them. On the other hand, the attention made her uneasy, like attracting more trouble if the wrong people heard about it. She tried to go about her usual routines, but every trip into town felt laced with an undercurrent of curiosity from the locals. At the diner, Tess, the owner, pulled Emily aside one afternoon. "Heard what happened at your place," Tess said, her voice low. "You and your dad all right?" "We're fine," Emily answered, forcing a smile. "Just shaken up." Tess nodded sympathetically. "Well, if you need a place to stay, you can always bunk with me for a while. I live closer to the sheriff's office." "Thank you," Emily said, genuinely touched. "I'll think about it, but I don't want to leave my dad alone out there, especially now." That evening, Mark stopped by to discuss the same issue. I can stay another night or two, but I've got obligations at my own place, he explained. I wish I could stick around longer. Robert appreciated the support, but insisted he and Emily would manage. They know we're serious. Bullying is easy when your victims can't fight back. But those men saw I'm willing to defend my home, he said resolutely. Nevertheless, Robert didn't relax his vigilance. Even though the nights were quiet and the bikers hadn't reappeared, he maintained the property's fortifications. Barbed wire, barricaded gates, and loaded firearms kept within arm's reach. Emily, too, found it impossible to revert to a carefree routine. She double-checked door locks, looked over her shoulder while driving, and watched the horizon for dust clouds that might signal approaching motorcycles. About a week after the shootout, the sheriff returned with new information. The gang had been spotted near the state line, heading in the direction of larger cities. Looks like they've moved on, probably to find easier pickings, he informed Robert. Emily exhaled in relief. So it's over? She asked. But even as she spoke, she felt a twinge of doubt. Could it really be that simple? Robert's gaze flicked to the farmland. Maybe it's over for now, he replied quietly. They might not come back, but sometimes men like that hold grudges. The sheriff nodded. We'll remain on alert. In the meantime, you folks can breathe a little easier. If they cross back into our jurisdiction, we'll do our best to handle it. Those words were reassuring, yet Emily couldn't fully quell her anxiety. She recalled the bearded man's hate-filled gaze, the reckless gunshots. Some threats, once unleashed, linger in the air like thunderclouds, waiting to strike again. But for the moment at least, the Parker farm was safe, and that had to be enough. As the summer sun rose over the fields, life at the Parker farm began its gradual return to something resembling normal. Emily no longer jumped at every engine sound, and Robert let go of his nightly habit of patrolling the perimeter with a rifle slung over his shoulder. Though he still kept the weapons cabinet stocked and accessible, the scattered bullet holes and patched fence boards remained visible reminders of how close their peaceful existence had come to ruin. One evening after dinner, Emily found her father in the barn, tending to a new calf. Soft lamplight flickered across the walls, illuminating a faint smile on his face. She approached slowly, inhaling the warm scent of hay. For a moment, it felt like old times, just father and daughter caring for their animals in the quiet of dusk. How's she doing? Emily asked, nodding at the calf. Robert looked up. She's healthy, got her mother's feisty spirit. He reached out, ruffling the calf's brown coat. Emily hesitated, then spoke softly. Dad, about what happened. You never really told me everything about your past. I know you served in the army, but Delta Force? Her voice held both curiosity and a tinge of lingering fear. He set the feed bucket down, studying her face. I was in Delta, yes. It's not something I like to talk about much. We did missions that most people never hear about. It was dangerous, brutal work. I left because I wanted a chance at a normal life, especially after your mom passed. Emily nodded. I'm grateful you did, but seeing you like that, so controlled in a firefight, it made me realize how trained you really are. Robert placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. I learned to handle threats quickly, decisively. But believe me, I'd rather fix fences and feed cattle than fire another shot in anger. Emily swallowed the lump in her throat. I'm proud of you, Dad. I just hope those men never come back. A gentle breeze stirred the barn's rafters. Robert guided Emily outside, gazing at the farm under the twilight sky. Me too, he said softly. We'll be vigilant, but we won't live in fear. This is our home, your home. We'll defend it again if we have to, but let's pray we won't. They stood there for a few moments. The crickets' chorus, a soothing reminder that life goes on. The fields swayed under the moonlight, a testament to the resilience of the land they worked so hard to maintain. In that moment, Emily felt the weight of the recent ordeal begin to lift, replaced by a sense of calm rooted in her father's unwavering presence. Word spread far beyond Stonebridge of the drunk biker's bully, a farmer's daughter, only to discover her father is a Delta Force commander. Some recounted the tale with awe at Robert's hidden capabilities. Others saw it as a cautionary legend. Never underestimate someone just because they seem ordinary. On the Parker farm, however, No one was celebrating or seeking glory. Father and daughter simply continued their quiet life, tending to the fields and animals, cherishing the peaceful days that, for a terrifying moment, had been at risk of vanishing. Though the threat had forced Robert to reveal a part of himself he'd hoped to leave behind, it also underscored a timeless truth. Justice can arise from unexpected places, and bullies often crumble when confronted by a determined and skilled defender. In the end, the farmland returned to its familiar rhythms, the crowing rooster at dawn, the chug of the old tractor, and the gentle laughter shared by a father and daughter who knew that beneath the humble surface, they possessed the strength to stand firm against any threat. Looking back on this harrowing adventure, I'm struck by how resilience and compassion triumph over aggression. Despite the immense danger, a father's unwavering resolve and love for his daughter carried the day. It's a powerful reminder that true strength doesn't always roar. It sometimes stands quietly, prepared to do whatever it takes to safeguard those who matter most. In the end, their home remains a beacon of hope in a chaotic world, and the lesson lingers. Never underestimate the quiet ones. Everyone has untapped courage when pushed to the brink. I hope this story resonates with you as it did with me, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your opinions in the comments. Let's discuss the high points, the moral takeaways, and any lingering questions you might have.